Hi everybody, we've been talking about Abraham and Isaac, and today we're going to talk about Jacob. So Abraham, he lived until he was 195 years old. And then we heard last week how Isaac married Rebecca. And we knew that the promise that God had made to Abraham that he would have a son, and out of that son would come a great nation, many people. I'm sure that Abraham and Isaac and Rebecca expected Isaac to have many children, but he didn't. In fact, Isaac and Rebecca had to wait 20 years and realize that Rebecca was not able to have children. And so Isaac prayed for Rebecca that she would have children. And God heard his prayer. So Rebecca was going to have a child, but she knew something was not normal. As she was carrying this child, she thought, oh my, what's going on? My stomach is moving around like the baby is fighting itself or something. What's going on? And so she prayed and she asked God what was going on. And God answered her prayer. And he told her, he said, Rebecca, there are two nations in your belly. In your womb, there are two nations, two different kinds of people. And one will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger. So this was very unusual. She was going to have two babies, and the older would serve the younger. That's very unusual because in those days, the oldest child, the oldest son, would be the one that everyone else in the family had to listen to. He was like, if anything happened to the father, he was like the father figure for the family. So this is what God told Rebecca, and I'm sure she thought about this a lot and remembered what God had said. Well, it was time for the babies to be born. And there were twins, and the first one came out all hairy, red and hairy like a carpet or a garment, the Bible says. They named him Esau. And then the second baby came out, and he was a boy as well. But he did not want to get left behind. His hand was actually grabbing onto the foot of his brother. And they called him Jacob. They did not look alike. And as they grew, we find they did not act alike either. Their likes and things were different as well. So Esau, the firstborn, the one that was red and hairy red, he was a good hunter. He was very good with his bow and arrow, and he could go and hunt for food, and he was called a man of the field. He loved being outdoors. That was Esau. Now Jacob, it doesn't say anything about him enjoying hunting. He liked to stay in the tents, the Bible said. Unfortunately, the Bible tells us something else about this family. They say that it says that Isaac had a favorite son. And Isaac's favorite son was Esau. He liked to eat the meat that Esau hunted. He liked the idea that Esau liked to be outdoors. His favorite son was Esau. Now, Rebecca had a favorite son. She, obviously, like the other son, his name was Jacob. And she, the Bible says he liked to stay in the tents. Well, she would have been around the tents. So Jacob probably hung out with his mother a lot, and Esau hung out with his father a lot. And you'll find as we go on with what happened in this family that there must have been a breakdown in communication between Rebecca and Isaac, the parents. They each chose a different son. They didn't tell each other what was going on. They didn't discuss things for the family together. They were separated by something. They weren't talking to each other. Anyways, the Bible had said that the boys would be different, and they were. he said they would be two different nations. So only one would be the nation that God had promised to Abraham, that great nation that would bless the whole world. Only one would be part of that nation if they were two different nations. And God had said that the older would serve the younger. Well, how would that happen? In their culture back then, the oldest son always inherited. He would inherited the most from the father. In fact, he would have a double portion. He would have twice as much as anyone else in the family. And there was a birthright with blessings attached that the oldest son would receive. It would be material blessings like wealth and animals and the things that his father owned. And it would also be a spiritual blessing. He would be the spiritual head of the home and be the one that would lead the prayers and teach the family and those sorts of things. Well, the boys must have been told about the promises that God had given to Abraham. They must have been told about how special their family was and the miracles that God had done in their family. But Esau was not interested in those things, not at all. He was more interested in hunting and going out and doing his own thing in sports, I'm sure. And then there was Jacob. He was interested in these stories. He listened to them and he thought about them. He was interested. Esau didn't even care about his own birthright. The fact that he was the firstborn and normally would have received all the blessings and inheritances from his family, he wasn't even really concerned about that. Okay, well, one day when the boys were older, Esau was out hunting, and he was hunting for a long time, and he got really tired and really hungry. I don't know if you ever got so hungry that you felt that you could eat just about anything, that, oh, you're starving to death. You're so hungry. Well, that's the way Esau felt. He literally felt like he was going to die, like he was starving to death. He was a pretty dramatic young man. So when Esau came back from hunting on this day when he was starving to death, he saw his brother Jacob. And Jacob had been cooking, and he was happily eating a little bowl of stew. He was enjoying his bowl of stew. And Esau saw it, and he was like, oh, Jacob, you have to give me some of your soup. I'm going to die here. I'm so faint. I think I'm going to faint. Give me some of your soup. And Jacob looked at Esau and he was like, well, you know, I'll sell you some of my soup in exchange for your birthright. And Esau was like, oh, I'm so hungry, I'm going to faint. What do I care about my birthright if I'm dead? Sure, you can have my birthright. Just give me some soup. And Jacob said, now you have to promise, vow, swear to me that I can have the birthright in exchange for this soup. And Esau's like, I swear, no, give me the soup. So he gave him the soup, and Esau ate the soup and went his way. And the Bible says, thus Esau despised his birthright. The birthright was worth far more than a bowl of soup. And I'm sure he would not have died if he waited a few minutes to get something else to eat. So he despised his birthright. Well, after this happened, the Bible says that God appeared to Isaac 2 different times and made the same promises to him that he had made to Abraham, his father. So what were those promises? That God would multiply him and his family, and his seed or family would be like the stars in heaven. There'd be so many. Also, he would give his seed the land that he had promised that they were living on. Also, that in his seed or his family, all the nations of the earth would be blessed because of them. And the reason he told Isaac that he was making these promises to him was because his father Abraham had obeyed God. Well, then Isaac was getting very old and very frail. God had blessed him just like he blessed Abraham, so that he was very rich. He had his father's riches and then the riches God had given him, so he was very rich. But he was also almost blind, or maybe he was blind, but he could not see. And he thought that he was going to die because he was getting old. So he called Esau, his favorite son, to him. And he said, "Go and take your bow and arrow and go out in the field and get some venison, some deer. And I want you to use the venison to make the meat dish that I love. And then I want you to cook it for me the way I like it. Make that dish just the way I like it. And then I will bless you before I die." This was like he was going to give him his inheritance. And the Bible does not say what Isaac thought about the promise God had made to Rebekah that the older son would serve the younger. We don't know what Isaac thought about that, but obviously Isaac was intending to give all the usual inheritance to his older son Esau, who was his favorite. There was just one thing. Rebekah, Isaac's wife, heard all of this. She was nearby and she heard this conversation, and her favorite son was Jacob. She wanted him to get the inheritance and the blessing. Plus, she had heard God say that the older would serve the younger. So, what was she going to do? Well, Esau went to the field with his bow and arrow to get some venison. Rebekah went to Jacob and told him what was going on. Now, what could she have done? She could have prayed about this. She could have asked God what his will was, but she didn't. She went to Jacob and she said, "Listen, I have a plan. This is what's going on. Your father Isaac is going to give the blessing to your brother Esau, but this is my plan. Jacob, you need to listen to me. Listen and obey me. You need to go and get 2 young goats, and I will make that savory meat dish that your father loves. And you will bring it to your father to eat it so that he will bless you instead of Esau before he dies." And Jacob was like, "But Mom, Esau is hairy and I am not. My father will feel my skin and know that I'm being deceptive. He'll know I'm lying, that I'm not Esau. He'll be able to tell, and then he'll curse me instead of blessing me." He was like, "This is not a good idea." And his mother said, "The curse be on my head. I will take the curse for you. You do what I tell you to do." And so she said, "Just do what I say." And so Jacob went and he got the goats. He went along with his mother's plan, and Rebekah cooked the goats. She wanted to make her own plan instead of trusting God for him to make his plan happen. So Jacob had got the goats, and Rebekah had made the meat dish that Isaac loved. She was his wife. She knew what he liked to eat, and obviously this man's heart was connected with his stomach, and he really cared about his food. This was an important thing to him. So Rebekah had a further plan. She wasn't just going to make the meat dish. She was like, okay, I need to figure out the whole thing about Esau being more hairy than Jacob. Jacob's right. Isaac may not be able to see, but he can feel and he can hear, and he can smell. So how can I make Jacob seem more like Esau? So she got the skin of the goats and she put it on his arms and his hands and the back of his neck and his shoulders, where they were peeking out of his clothes, so that when his father went to touch him, he would feel the hair and think that it was Esau. And then she also went, and in her tent she had some of Esau's good clothes. They must have been the clothes that were set aside for special events or something like that. She had them especially in her tent. So she got those out and she smelled them. They smelled just like Esau. They smelled like the fields. And so she got Jacob to put those on. And then Jacob took the meat dish that his mother had made, and he's covered with this goat skin on himself, and he's got his brother's clothes on, and he goes into his father and he says, "My father." Now, I'm sure his heart must have been pounding. He was afraid that he would get a curse if his father figured this out. But he obviously really wanted this blessing. So he was willing to lie to get it. And so Isaac said, "Here am I. Who are you, my son?" And Jacob said, "I am Esau, your firstborn. I've done what you asked. Sit and eat the venison so that your soul can bless me." And Isaac was suspicious. His hearing was still perfectly fine. It didn't really sound like Esau. He said, "How did you find the venison so quickly?" And Jacob said, "Oh, because the Lord your God brought it to me." Ooh, there's line number 2. And Isaac said, "Come over here, come near, so that I can feel you to see if you are Esau or not." And he's thinking to himself, the Bible says, and he's saying, the voice is Jacob's. And he feels his arm. But his hands are Esau's. "Are you actually my son Esau?" And Jacob said, "I am," line number 3. And so Isaac said, "Well, bring the food over so that I can bless you." And he ate the food and he drank some wine and he said, now come here and give me a kiss, my son." So Jacob came over, he came right up to him and he kissed him. And his father smelled him as he kissed him. He's like, "Well, he smells like Esau." He said, "Ah, the smell of my son is the smell of a field which God has blessed." That was what convinced him. And he said, "The Lord of heaven give you the dew of heaven and plenty of food from the earth." That was the first part of the blessing. Then he said, "Let nations serve you and bow down to you." Second part of the blessing. He said, "Be Lord over all your brethren and let your brother bow down to you." Third part of the blessing. This went against what God had said was going to happen. But remember, Esau was Isaac's favorite. So he thinks he's blessing Esau and he's saying, "Your brother will bow down to you." And then Isaac said, "Cursed be every one that curses you, and blessed be him that blesses you." So he gave him a 4-part blessing. And then when he was done blessing him, as soon as Isaac was done blessing him and Jacob left, right on his heels came in Esau. Esau had gotten his venison very quickly and cooked it up. And he was right after Jacob. He came in and he brought the food for his father and he said, "Let my father arise and eat of his son's venison so that your soul can bless me." Almost the same wording as Jacob. And Isaac said, "Who are you?" And Esau said, "I am your son, your firstborn son." Esau, like, "Weren't you expecting me? You told me to do this." And Isaac, the Bible says, trembled very exceedingly. He was so overwhelmed by this situation. He was so upset. He said, it says he trembled very exceedingly, and he said, "Well then, who was just here? Who brought me food and I ate it and I blessed him he is blessed. I can't take it back." Well, Esau, he started to cry. He was heartbroken. He said, "Well, bless me too." And Isaac said, "Well, I can't. Your brother tricked me and took away your blessing." Well, Esau was starting to get mad. And he said, "He is rightly called Jacob. Jacob means supplanter, and he has taken away both my birthright," remember the pottage, "and my blessing." And he said to his father, "Don't you have a blessing for me?" Well, this is significant because Isaac did have 2 sons, but he did not save a blessing for his son Jacob. And so when he blessed what he thought was Esau, he had no blessing he hadn't planned a blessing for the other son. And so Esau said, don't you have a blessing for me? And Isaac said, well, I made him your Lord. I made him above you, and everyone, his servants, I blessed him with corn and with wine. What can I bless you with? He was trying to think about what blessing he would give to his favorite son, and he couldn't think of anything that was left that he hadn't already blessed Jacob with. And Esau said, do you only have one blessing? Bless me too. And now he's really crying at this point. And Isaac said, you will live in the field and live by your sword. So he's going to have to protect himself with his sword. You will serve your brother. But a time will come when you will break his yoke from off your neck. Well, Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing that he got. He thought, as soon as my father dies, I will kill Jacob. He was so mad at his brother. Well, Rebecca, she seems to find out many things. She heard about Isaac's plan to kill Jacob. And she couldn't let this happen. She was like, why would I be deprived of 2 sons in one day? I need to keep this from happening. So Rebecca got another plan. So she called Jacob to her and she said, your brother wants to kill you. So listen to me and obey. Same as before. She's like, you listen to me. I want you to travel back to my brother Laban's house and stay there a little while, a few days, until your brother cools off, until he gets over his anger. And then I'll send for you and you can come home again. What she didn't know is that Esau was not going to cool off or lose his anger anytime soon. Then Rebecca went to Isaac. And here's that lack of communication again. She did not tell Isaac what was actually going on. She didn't sit down with him and say, listen, Isaac, I have heard that Esau wants to kill Jacob, and I suggest that we do such and such to deal with the situation. She didn't do that. She didn't talk to Isaac about that at all. She decides to deceive her husband again. She comes to Isaac and she's acting. She says, oh, well, she's probably partly acting. I'm sure she did feel this way, but she says, I am sick to death of Esau's wives, these heathen wives that he's married here in this land. They're the death of me. They're gonna be the death of me. I want Jacob to go back to my family and marry a good girl from there so that he doesn't do the same thing as Esau, and his wife drives me crazy until I feel like I'm going to die. Well, Isaac thought that this was actually a good plan. After all, his father had sent back to his homeland to get a wife for him, Rebecca. So he thought this was a good plan. He agreed and he called Jacob and he said, you need to go back to the home of Rebecca. You need to go to Laban and find a wife there. And he gave him a blessing. He said, God bless you and multiply you and give you the blessing of Abraham and inherit the land. So all of this conflict and turmoil and deception that's going on in this poor family, in the end, Jacob does get the blessing that God had intended for him to get. But God does not like deceit. It wasn't his will for it to happen in this way. If Rebecca had chosen not to be deceitful, then God still would have made his will happen. He would have made things happen the way that he wanted them to. He did not need Rebecca's help in doing this. Kind of like Sarah tried to help God by being like, I'm too old to have a baby. Maybe if my husband marries another woman and has a baby, that will work. Yeah, that didn't work. So we can see that we don't need to step in and help God with his plans, that he can do it all by himself. He doesn't need our help. He's all powerful and his ways are perfect. And you can see the family turmoil that's going on, where there's division between Rebekah and Isaac. There's division between Jacob and Esau. Each one had their favorite son. This is not a healthy family dynamic, but in the end, God can make it all work out, which you will see that he does. So that's all I have for you today. And we will find out more of what happens to Jacob when he leaves home and goes back to visit his mother's family to find a bride. So have a good week.